Today, we're diving into something that feels like it belongs in a history book, but is actually shaping your world right now. We're talking about the colonial foundations of modern inequality, a kind of hidden economic blueprint that was drawn up centuries ago, but as you'll see, is still very much in use.
Yeah, most of us think of colonialism as being over. You know, new flags went up, independence was declared, and that was that. But what if that's only half the story? What if the economic engine built during that time never actually got dismantled? That's the big question we're tackling. So to really get this, we first need to look at the original blueprint. And you have to understand, the goal was never to build up countries. The goal was to build a global supply chain.
And the model? It was brutally simple. Step 1, you go into a colony and you extract all the valuable raw materials you can find. We're talking cotton, rubber, minerals, you name it. Step 2, you ship all of it back to the colonial home country, and then, Step 3, you use those materials to manufacture finished goods, which you then sell right back to the people in the colony. It's a perfect, closed loop designed to pull wealth in only one direction.
This quote right here just hits the nail on the head. The system wasn't broken or inefficient. It was doing exactly what it was built to do. The point was never to create thriving, self-sufficient economies. The point was to turn entire regions into giant supply depots for someone else's industrial revolution.
Okay, so that's the theory. But what did this look like in the real world? Well, let's take our first case study, the deliberate unraveling of India's economy.
You see, before the British really took over, India wasn't some backwater. It was a global manufacturing powerhouse, famous all over the world for its incredible, high-quality textiles. They weren't just exporting raw cotton. They were exporting beautiful, finished products.
And then everything flipped. British policies, things like huge tariffs on Indian goods, absolutely decimated this local industry. Just look at these numbers. In just 30 years, Indian textile exports to Britain basically vanished, falling by over 95%. At the same time, cheap British cloth flooded the Indian market, soaring by more than 50 times. India was transformed from a world-class producer into a captive customer.
And the human cost of this was just staggering. And don't take my word for it. This quote is from the British Governor-General at the time, seeing it with his own eyes. Entire cities that had been centers of industry saw their populations collapse as millions of skilled artisans were driven into poverty.
Now, this pattern wasn't a one-off. Let's jump over to the Congo, under Belgian rule, where you can see the exact same logic applied not just to an industry, but to the entire country's infrastructure.
In the Congo, the mission was crystal clear. Get rubber and minerals out of the ground, and do it as quickly and cheaply as possible. All this incredible wealth was being generated, but almost none of it was put back into the country to build things like schools or hospitals or even just regular local businesses.
This is such a crucial point. You can look at old maps and see railroads, but you have to ask, who were they for? They weren't built to connect cities or to help local people trade with each other. Nope. They were basically giant conveyor belts, running from the mines deep in the interior straight to the ports on the coast. It literally turned the country inside out for the sole purpose of export.
All right, so that's the history. I know you're probably thinking, what does this have to do with today? Well, this is where it gets really interesting, because we can see this exact pattern playing out right now in the supply chain for one of the most important minerals on Earth, cobalt.
See, when countries finally got their political independence, they inherited these economies that were already built for extraction. The old rulers might have left, but the fundamental structure, exporting raw stuff, importing finished stuff, that often stayed locked in place. It didn't disappear, it just evolved.
And that brings us right back to the Congo. Today, the Democratic Republic of Congo supplies nearly 3/4 of the entire world's cobalt. You know, the stuff that's essential for the batteries in pretty much every smartphone and electric car.
So, with a near monopoly on such a critical resource, who's actually in charge? Well, this data from just a couple of years ago is pretty mind-blowing. It shows that over 3/4 of the DRC's cobalt production was controlled by Chinese-owned companies. The flags have changed, sure, but that pattern of external control, it feels eerily familiar, doesn't it?
So let's just follow the journey of that cobalt for a second. Step 1 happens right there in the DRC. The raw material gets dug up and goes through some very basic processing to become what's called cobalt concentrate.
Okay, but here's the thing. This isn't where the real money is made. Just like with the raw cotton from colonial India, the most profitable part of the process, the part where you add the most value, happens somewhere else entirely.
And this is where that value gap just becomes so clear. The DRC exports a relatively low-value concentrate. It's only about 35% pure.
That gets shipped off mostly to China, where it gets refined into super high purity metals and complex battery parts that are worth way, way more. So, raw material goes out, high-value processing happens elsewhere. It is the colonial blueprint perfectly updated for the 21st century.
So, where does all this leave us? I mean, when you put the old historical blueprint right next to a modern supply chain like this one, the resemblance is just impossible to ignore. This quote from the head of the DRC's own state mining company just says it all. Think about that. Even though they have almost all of this critical resource that the world is desperate for, they don't get to set the rules. They don't set the price. They have to take the terms that are set by others.
And that is the absolute key takeaway here. What we are seeing is not just a legacy of history. It's an active, living continuity. The economic DNA of so many places was never coded for internal growth and development. It was coded for external supply.
So that leaves us with a final question for you to think about. When we try to figure out why there's so much inequality in the world, is it enough to just look at a country's policies today? Or do we need to look at the very system they inherited, the economic foundation they're still standing on? It's a heavy question, but one worth asking.